Hello, my name is Keith. Welcome to this demonstration of ION scripting examples. Before we dive into seeing some actual examples of using scripting, I want to remind you that this is part of a series, and then an introductory basics video was done. A link to that should be appearing on a card in the corner of your screen right now. So please check out that if you haven't before continuing on with this video. Before we dive into the actual scripting examples that I want to go through, we should cover some more basics, and that is some requirements for ION scripting. You must write in Python 3.6 or 3.7. You can't go back to earlier, for example, Python 2 code. The total execution time for your script has to be less than 15 seconds. So the processing power in the Infor Cloud is very fast. And so 15 seconds may not sound like a lot, but actually you can get an extreme amount of processing power out of those 15 seconds. The payload that comes into the script from your document flow and then back out of the script to your document flow has to be smaller than 5 megabytes in size. And the total runtime memory consumed during the execution of that script has to be less than 1,000 megabytes. There's also no external access to any other systems via API calls or web service calls or anything like that within your script during runtime. And lastly, this is for Infor OS Cloud only. So if you are an on-premise OS Cloud customer, this feature is not available to you. Now, these requirements can all change over time, so do pay attention to your release notes and updates to make sure that some of these requirements haven't changed. Now to give a little more information about the examples that you're about to see in the demonstration. In the previous video, we came up with the hypothetical situation of retrieving some data from the Infor human resource application via an API call, and that JSON data set, then we needed to remove all instances of a certain field from the data set. We're going to continue with that hypothetical situation with some common string functions that people run into, these scenarios they run into when dealing with system integration. We'll be inserting, removing, and doing an if-then and finding some data. We're also doing a replace based on a pattern. And finally, we'll be doing a numeric function increasing a field by 3%. Let's get started and see how this is done. Here's where we left off with our script example from the last video. And again, please refer to that basics video before continuing on here. We said that one of our next requirements was to replace the value of a field. So in our first example, we just removed the entire element from the field from the JSON. Now we're going to replace it. So we're going to look for the field called source, or element called source, and replace whatever value it has with the constant GHR. Okay, so that's easy enough to do with another JSON native function. Our next requirement said that we had to remove all the spaces from a particular field, and this one called an XREF mapping field. So we're going to look for that XREF mapping field here. And then we're going to use this element strip function to take away all of the spaces. And then our next requirement had us do kind of an if-then statement. So our if-then statement said that if the record had a home country of CH, then we would set the field working remotely equal to true. So here we introduce a if statement, and we say if fields, which we've seen before, home country does equal, so we're not setting equal to, we're just saying is equal to CH. Then, and in Python, we just use it the next line, working remotely, set it equal to true. All right, to the value true, and that's a different field, working remotely. And then our next example involves some pattern matching in some regular expression pattern matching. And so there's a library, a module within Python called regex, and so we're going to import that into our script by import re statement. And again, that imports the regex module into this script so that we can use its functions. Now, Another thing we're going to do is we're going to build our own little function here ahead of time in the script. Allows us to define a pattern that we're going to match. We're going to match this dash SF50 dash wildcard dash 0 and take that pattern and put it into a variable called regex. Because we have that predefined, now we can use that in the following statement. So we're going to loop through every child in our JSON set of elements, our data set. We're going to take the value of that field and put it into a variable called value. And then we're going to take that field value, take out any blank spaces, and apply that pattern up here that we defined regex in a regex function called match. We're going to match it to it and see if that child value matches this pattern. Okay. And finally, if it does, then we're going to replace that child value with a new pattern. And we're going to substitute a 1 where that 0 was. And that's what our requirement was. Okay, our last example for this video was to get away from these string functions and try a math function to increase all the instances of the pay rate field by 3%. Again, to do this, we're going to build a little function ahead of time, and we're going to define this variable called percentage. It's going to return the value we put into it divided by 100 to give us a percentage. So if we have that done ahead of time, then we can add in something like this to our script, where we say look for the pay rate field and set it equal to the value of the pay rate field plus, and we'll use that function that we just defined, 3% of the field's value. So it's the field value plus 3%, 103%. That's what we wanted. So these were all just common string and math functions that you may run into while transforming data when sending data between system to system. From here, we could press the save button, then approve the script. We could go into testing and again, this way, like we showed in the first video, test this script to make sure it functions the way we want. I hope you found this helpful.